Okay, welcome back. This week we're going to talk about listening, which I know sounds like an awfully boring topic, but I promise you that it's extremely important for public speaking, not only as a speaker to understand how your audience is going to listen to you, but listening is a very important skill that you will need to carry on throughout your life. So I know that it might be mundane, but I promise you that if you pay attention and consider some of the aspects of this and how it relates to communication, it's going to benefit you in the long run, not just as an audience member, but as a speaker in this class and how you connect with other people outside of this class. Because if you understand how people listen and how to grab their attention, you will understand better ways to communicate effectively to those individuals. So it's going to help you both aspects of this. So we'll get right into it. We'll talk about what listening is. So listening, I'm not talking about hearing, right? So hearing is just this unintentional sense impression. It's a physical process that you undergo, right? So you can't really control it. If you can hear, you just get noise and sense impressions all the time through your surroundings, right? So it's just the act of information going through your ear canal, hitting your eardrum, going through the inner ear and the cochlea and all that stuff, right? So it's just a physical process. What I'm talking about, though, in this PowerPoint is listening, right? This is a conscious and intentional effort. It's a psychological process as well. It's you grappling with ideas in your head, inside of your head. So you're actually listening with more than just your ears, right? You're using your entire body, you're using your brain, and it requires a couple different aspects. So we're going to talk about active listening today, and not just ways to kind of listen and think about the information that you're receiving, but also how to communicate that back to the speaker without maybe using your words, right? So we'll talk about body language and stuff like that. But for active listening, it requires your attention to be open-minded, so to be objective and allow the speaker to kind of get their thoughts out without interrupting them, and to be patient, right? It may take the speaker a while to get to the point. But sometimes the payoff is worth the wait, right? It also requires your ability to think about the information that you're receiving and reflect on that information as it pertains to your worldview, your understanding, your belief systems, and all this other stuff. And it requires you to ask questions in your head about the information, right? So it's not just receiving it and going, oh, I hate that, or I don't agree with this person, or yeah, absolutely, it's the best thing ever. It requires you to honestly question the information that you're receiving. Is what the speaker's telling me true? Should I trust it? Should I believe it? Do I agree with that? Is it worthwhile? Is it important to me right now? And then based on these things, you can kind of provide useful feedback to the speaker, right? So this course is not just about public speaking, it's also about listening to the public. How to provide more beneficial feedback so that we can kind of make sure that every communication process we interact with, whether we're the sender or the receiver or both, is as effective as it possibly can be. So that's why this is actually a really important topic to talk about. So I want to go back to the Barnland model that we talked about last week, this transactional model of communication where I'm speaking to you linearly. You're not going to be able to provide me direct feedback. You can provide me feedback later. But in that instance, you're just also using a linear model of communication. But when speaking in public, when speaking in front of other people, we're talking about this communication process right here, right? And so even though you might be in front of a room, you're delivering a speech, and it seems linear, if you can see the audience and you can see their reactions in real time, then this is a transactional model because your audience will provide feedback to you without ever speaking, right? So we're going to be talking about body language today. We're going to be talking about other processes and aspects of feedback and communication that don't require language. And so that's another aspect of listening. But I want to use this model again because if you imagine the blue person here, they're the communicator, they're the sender, right? And they're trying to deliver this message. Everything else is getting in the way of them delivering that message to the best of their ability, right? So they have to consider all these aspects and how to sort of cut through all that stuff, right? Cut through the noise, cut through the biases and preconceived notions and worldviews, right? And deliver that message the best they can. So it's important to understand listening skills so that you can be the better speaker, but also help that communicator not have as many obstacles, right, in the way. If you can be a better listener, they don't have to work as hard. So, a couple elements here of listening itself. It does involve hearing. So even though I'm talking about a different act than hearing, listening does involve the physical process of receiving sound, right? So that's the first step. If you cannot hear something, then your ability to listen is very diminished, right? It also requires your attention, your presence, right? Your conscious presence in the moment, focusing your thoughts, focusing your intention towards the speaker or whatever it is you're listening to. This is very difficult in the 21st century because we have more than just sound distractions, right? We have our phones. We have the interconnectability of the world right now, and that's our attention is very short. And so it's more difficult to gain somebody's attention and keep it. So attention is a very important part of the listening process. It also involves decoding, right? So the interpretation of that information. It involves feedback, so providing the feedback through dialogue, through questions, through your posture, which I'll show you some of those today. Your facial expressions, your body language, right? And this is something as a teacher I can really relate to, because when I'm in front of the classroom, it can be very distracting and also it can make me self-conscious, right? When a student's sitting there, maybe their arms are folded and they just look kind of confused, and that may not actually be their mental state, right? So we'll talk about that and just how to provide more effective feedback to the speaker. And then lastly, remembering, right? The retaining of that information. So not only listening and grappling with this stuff, but taking it with you after you're gone, right? So what's the point of sitting in an auditorium for 30 minutes listening to someone speak if you're not going to remember any of it? So remembering is sort of that last process. So some elements of communication that we talked about last week that affects your ability to listen and affects your audience's ability to listen. First and foremost, noise, right? Any noise that interferes with your ability to deliver a message. So physiological, talking about maybe you're hungry, maybe you're thirsty, you're hot or you're cold. Psychological, this is your mental state, how you feel at the moment. Maybe you had a fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend, husband or wife. Maybe there's an issue with your kids right now that you're thinking about that's getting in the way of you retaining the information that I'm delivering you in this PowerPoint. And also external noises, right? So just actual noise. It could be outside distractions. Some of you talked about other people in the room or the television getting in the way. So this kind of all ties into your environment, right? Where are you at right now? So if you were watching this PowerPoint, it's probably best that you're in a quiet environment without much distraction, right? Maybe you're in a room by yourself so that other people aren't kind of bugging you, right? That can affect your ability to listen. And then most importantly, but probably the most abstract of these, is your worldview, right? The way that you understand the world, the way that you think about it, the way that you interpret the things that you see in the world affects the way that you listen to a speaker, right? Or any communicator, right? How you learn, the beliefs that you hold about, again, the world, your religious beliefs, your political beliefs, your educational values, right? The morals that you have. How moral are you versus somebody else? So for instance, me and my girlfriend have slightly different moral values. She hates lying of any kind, even if it's something that would just go down a rabbit hole or deter a conversation, right? She doesn't want to lie at all. Even if it's just a quick little omission, right? She hates it. Whereas I don't like lying, but I know that there are some instances where it's just better to maybe keep your mouth shut. It's better to maybe just tell a half truth or just not get into it, right? Because it's not going to be effective to the conversation that you're having. And so that can affect the feedback that we give, right? So whereas she wants to tell the truth all the time, every single time, that could lead to ineffective communication processes, right? Whereas sometimes I outweigh what's important. Now maybe that could hinder my relationship with the person I'm talking to because I'm not being honest with them, but maybe I'm thinking I want to have a more effective conversation in the moment. So it's not good or bad, right? No one's right or wrong, but our moral values in that instance sort of affects the way that we provide feedback. Your relationship to the universe and other humans affects this. So if you hate people, right, probably not going to be a good listener. If you truly care about people, you'll probably be one of the best listeners. And then your ability to solve problems is another instance, right? So these are things that will come up. So some barriers here. If you're sitting in a room and you're listening to somebody, what can you avoid? How can you take a more active role in the communication process? So some internal barriers. The first three are actually things that we're going to talk about later in the semester, but I want to introduce them now because they are important. And I'm talking about these three Greek words, ethos, logos, and pathos, right? So ethos, it just refers to the speaker's credibility. So as a listener, you might be judging their credibility, right? For instance, if I'm here and I'm in some just dirty, stained t-shirt, I look disheveled, maybe my hair is kind of in my face, I look like I've just been drinking all night long, your judgment of me would affect the way you listen to me, right? You probably wouldn't take me seriously. It would be very distracting because that's all you could notice is the way that I appear on the screen. And so our judgment of others is important. Ethos really pertains to how the speaker presents themselves. Also our emotions, right? How we react to something and how the speaker uses emotional appeals to reach the audience. So for instance, if I'm speaking to you and I'm trying to use an emotional appeal, meaning that I'm trying to reach your emotions, how effectively I do that might backfire, right? If I'm trying to get you angry about something and I got you too angry about a topic, that could derail the whole conversation. If I'm trying to get you to feel sympathy for something and you just have no sympathy to give for whatever it is that I'm talking about, you're out, right? You're just not listening anymore. So that's another important aspect, as well as understanding, right? So if I'm delivering this PowerPoint to you and I'm using this very highfalutin language and speaking loquaciously about the topic, right? The more that I do that, the less able you're going to be to grapple with all the aspects of this PowerPoint, right? So it wouldn't be good for me to speak with only SAT words, right? I have to break this down, not just theoretically, but also in a practical way. If I start speaking in that highfalutin way, it's just going to go in one ear and out the other, right? This happens to me as well. It's very difficult to listen to somebody that's using very technical jargon, right? So our ability to understand what's being said affects our ability to listen. And these are really important factors, and we're going to talk about this more when we get into persuasion and informative speeches. But I want to introduce them now because they're one of the three main ways that we sort of listen, or things that affect our ability to listen. Other factors, just maybe the topic's uninteresting, right? Maybe the speaker's just talking about something you don't care about. Maybe their delivery is very stilted and dry, and it sounds like this, and then it just puts you to sleep, right? Maybe you're trying to listen for certain facts that just aren't coming, and so you don't pay attention to anything else, right? You're only listening out for one particular thing, which can mean that you're ignoring other things that are being said. Maybe you have a personal bias. So again, talk about the abortion topic from last week. maybe I'm speaking, let's say I'm delivering a pro-choice argument and you're pro-life. That's really going to hinder your ability to take me seriously or listen to what I have to say, and vice versa. So when I talked about earlier about being open and being open-minded, to be a better listener, we have to take our worldview and take those biases and just set them to the side for a minute so that we can listen to what the person has to say, and we can bring that worldview back in, right, as we're sort of grappling with these ideas. But if we just put those worldviews up front and say, nope, I'm pro-life, I don't care what you say, then the communication process is over before it started, right? And you won't learn anything. And I'm not saying that every communication process is going to get you to change your mind or help you learn something or make you learn something. But you'll never learn anything if you just start every communication process with, this is what I believe, and you can't get past this, right? So setting those barriers, those concerns and biases aside is really important. There might be a language barrier or cultural differences. So in my role as a teacher, I have several non-native speaking students, right? And they all come from different countries and different cultural backgrounds. And so depending on what country they come from, they might have a different understanding of our sort of relationship between teacher and student, right? I've had students before from certain countries where the teacher-student relationship is one of great respect. So I've had students that would not look me in the eye because of where they came from, right? And so that can be a cultural difference that maybe affects listening. I've also had issues where the students' language it wasn't poor, but some of their choices were, or they were having difficulty understanding some of my colloquialisms, right? So I'm from Maryland, so I use certain words and phrases that Marylanders understand that are not common English phrases. And so I've had students, for instance, that they'll hear me talk and go, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? They get the words themselves, they don't understand the phrases, and so that can kind of create this language barrier. And then one of the worst is if you're just faking attention, and I know all of you at home have had boyfriends or girlfriends or husbands and wives, and you fake your attention, right? I do it all the time, not all the time, but I do it quite a bit, right? I know my girlfriend does it to me, and we do it to other people as well. We just tune out, or we don't really want to talk to the person that we're talking to, and we just fake the attention, right? We just look them in the eye, we give the head nod, yeah, oh, awesome, yep, yeah, right? You're not listening to anything that person's saying. You're only focused on, how do I react in such a way that makes it look like I'm paying attention? But even though you'll get in conversations where you don't want to talk to that person, you're not doing yourself any favors, right? Because it could be that the person you're talking to and you're faking their attention, they see that you're paying attention to them, and they go, man, that person, they were a really good listener. I'm going to talk to them more. So it doesn't always pay to fake your attention. Some external barriers, right? This is the quiet speaker and the person that speaks like this. Then you maybe have to turn your volume up, or the person that speaks very loudly, right? Sorry for the people with the headbuds in, but your ability to speak clearly, to enunciate, to make sure that you're speaking in a volume that's not distracting is really important. And as a listener, this can definitely affect you. And there's not much that we can do about this other than maybe just ask the speaker, could you speak up a little bit? I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Something else, the speaker's mannerisms or appearance. Like I said before, if I was here in just this beer-stained, puke-stained t-shirt, my hair's disheveled, maybe I'm wearing one of those like beer helmets, that would be very distracting. Even if you thought it was funny or cool, you would not be paying attention to anything I'm saying. You're only focused on, wow, look at my professor right now. So that's important to take note of. If you are in a situation where the speaker, has a problematic appearance, it's in your best interest to just not pay much attention to it, right? yes, the speaker should have dressed better for the occasion, right? Maybe they didn't do enough to make themselves look appropriate for the situation that they're in. I mean, there's something we're actually going to talk about in a couple weeks. But as a listener, it's in your best interest to try and not hold these things entirely against them. Yes, it is a factor, but don't let it be distracting, right? Other things too, room temperature. This can be very difficult, especially for any churchgoers out there. This is, I think, one of the most, it did something where room temperature was one of the top things that distract people in church, was whether it was too hot or too cold. Go figure. Again, interruptions or phone calls. We're not in a classroom setting, so you can pause this video at any time, right? But if you were, I was at a funeral recently, and they told us to turn our cell phones off, and we did. And my girlfriend had her cell phone, the sound was off, but she had an app open that, at one of the worst possible times, something happened where she checked the time on her phone, and because the screen came on, the app sort of acted up, and it just made sound, even though the sound was off. Could hear it through the whole sanctuary. It was funny for me. It wasn't really funny for her, but things like that can really affect your ability to listen. And smartphones all the way. I mean, smartphones are the most distracting thing. As a teacher, this is something that I just try to ignore at this point if someone's on their phone, because there's no stopping it. But you as a listener, you as a student and a listener of other people, put your phones down, I used to have people when I was in college, they'd come over to my house, and I had an open door policy. You didn't have to knock, you just came right in, and people would always come right in, and they'd sit down and be there to hang out. And this is when smartphones really started taking off, and they'd just come in and they'd sit down on the couch and they'd be playing a game. And 20 minutes would go by, and I'm looking at them, and I'd be like, what are you doing? Oh, I came to hang out. They wouldn't be talking to me. They wouldn't be interacting with me. They're just there on my couch, taking up space, drinking my beer, probably, right? So smartphones, be aware that these are problematic for your attention. So, taking all this stuff into consideration, all right, that's some of the boring stuff, right? And we know most of that. But why is that important? It's important because all those barriers affect the way that we provide feedback and the way that we influence the speaker that's talking to us. So there's nonverbal and verbal feedback, right? The most important thing is eye contact. If you're communicating with someone, whether it's individually, even if you're in an auditorium and there's 400 other people in the room with you, looking at the speaker, right, and then the speaker looking at you is one of the best ways to connect and just keep that communication channel open, right? So eye contact is very important, and I know a lot of people have issues with this. I have my own issues with this. Sometimes I get a little hypnotized by eye contact, so I kind of look anywhere else, but it's not good for communicating. And if you're not making eye contact, it can signal to the speaker that you're not paying attention, or you don't care about what they have to say, or that something's wrong, right? You may not be looking at the person because you just can't physically look them in the eye because of the way that you feel about them, for good or for ill. Nodding your head's good, letting people know, signaling to people, yeah, yep, I understand, yep, right? And then body language. This is really important, and then I'll use leaning in here too. So I'm going to make the screen a little bigger so you can kind of see me. So if you're talking, right, let me bring this down a little bit. If you're communicating with someone, and you're kind of like this. A lot of people do this because it's comfortable, because they don't have to do with their hands, right? And they're doing one of these, right? And it looks like I'm paying attention, right? Because this might be how I'm kind of like really listening to someone. I might be like this. But if you look at my face, I kind of look a little angry, maybe a little confused, possibly intimidating, right? This doesn't signal openness, right? This kind of signals someone that is maybe a little frustrated, maybe they're a little agitated or confused, right? This is not good feedback, nonverbal feedback, right? Even though I'm leaning in, right, that can still be intimidating because of the way that I look. I'm closed off, right? This is closed off. If I'm standing like this, you can't see my placement, but if I have my hands on my shoulders, for instance, I'm more open, right? My body's more open. It's kind of signaling that I'm more receptive to the person that's speaking. So doing this, especially if you're standing in front of someone, this is a good way to stand. I'm more open. I can lean in a little bit, but I'm not doing one of these, right? So even when I'm leaning in, it's less aggressive, right? Also consider what is on your face. I was giving a teaching demonstration in grad school, so I was teaching in grad school, and my supervisor came in, and it was nerve-wracking because the supervisor she's a hard ass. She really held our feet to the fire, and she's sitting in the back of the room, and she's taking notes. I mean, she's like every single word I'm saying, she's just like writing down, and she has this look on her face, right? She's leaning over on the desk and she's writing, and she's going like this. The whole time, throughout the hour and 15 minutes. And so in my head, as this young, new teacher, I think this is my first year of teaching, I'm freaking out in my head. I'm just like really nervous. I'm like, oh my God, she hates the visual that I have up. She doesn't understand. She's judging me. I felt very judged. And I think it probably made me a little bit better in the moment because I was trying to actively be aware that she might be angry about something that I was doing. So I was trying a little bit harder, which was, I guess, good for me. But the funny thing is, when I went in to actually talk to her afterwards, so she brings you into the office and she goes over what she went with you, right? This is typical in teaching demonstrations. And she loved it. And I had said, that's great because I was really concerned. You looked very confused and maybe a little angry. And she was like, no, I just couldn't. She said she was having trouble seeing something on the screen, but it wasn't my fault. It was just something to do with the projector. And so she was having a really difficult time actually seeing some of the stuff that was up there, but through no fault of my own, right? So alleviates all this pressure. But in the moment, it was a really bad nonverbal feedback on her part, right? It affected me. It made me more nervous. I was probably sweating a little bit more. So that can have real-time effects, the way that you sort of interact with your face. So be wary of that, right? Do more to really consider what's going on here, right? What signals am I sending to the speaker? If you're smiling, that signals that you're having a good time, you understand, making a good point, right? If you're dead face, that's scary. I had an interview, so as told you before, I got a full-time job here. And when I was interviewing, one of the people on the committee just had a very stern, flat face, right? Never met this person before. We're sitting in a room, and they're just looking at me like this. No emotional response, no reactions, anything. And in my head, again, I'm losing it. Oh, God, this person's going to decide whether or not I get a job here. And, when I got to talking to that person, it was another situation where that's just their face. That's just the face that they make. And that's okay, but understand that your facial expressions do signal things to the speaker. So that can really affect communication. So if you're in a classroom setting, the nonverbal aspects are really important, right? Verbal aspects, then, if you're just in a one-on-one communication or you're in a discussion or dialogue, right? Asking questions is really great. Just letting the person know that you're interested and that you want to know more. Asking questions is the best way to let them know, I do actually care about this. I do want to know more. I'm interested. Even if you're just getting to know someone, the best thing that you can do, and anybody that's that's out in the dating world, ask questions about them, right? Don't talk about you. Ask them questions. Let them know that you're really interested in them and who they are. And also repeating messages back to the speaker. So if they're talking and when you go to respond, if you start your response with just repeating just something simple like, oh, when you said this, I thought this, or I thought that was really cool when you did this thing, right? So just reiterating certain things to let them know and signal, hey, I did listen to you. I did retain that information. I'm going to say it back to you. And that goes in with just responding, right? With just honest responses and critique. So, as speakers, what can you do in your speeches or just in life to help listeners overcome these barriers, right? So if we know all these things, we know about the noise and the worldview, and we know about judgment and their attention and smartphones and all this stuff, how do you draw their attention in, but not pander? And that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about later. But I'm not going to play it here. This is a great song that you can check out by Bo Burnham, the comedian. He's talking about music in this one comedy special, but in this video he has a country song, and he kind of problematizes country music, modern country music, for just pandering and selling beer and trucks to their audience, right? So he starts out the video talking about how Dolly Parton and Willie Nelson were these great country artists, and they wrote about real things. And then now you have people that it's like every line is just an ad for something, right? So he talks about how there's always something about beer and red Solo cups and trucks in all these songs. So it's a really good video to check out. And that's what I mean by pandering to your audience. Just kind of giving them exactly what they want. This is called fan service. Although it may make them like you, you're not actually delivering anything to them, right? You're not giving them anything. You're not providing them anything. You're just creating an echo chamber, right? And just giving them back what they already think. That's not evidence of a good speaker, and it's not evidence of good communication, because you're not changing their minds about anything. You're not getting them to think in new ways or helping them learn or just think about anything other than what they already think about. So try not to pander. But what to do, and this is the advice from TED Talks, the number one thing that makes TED speeches so great, for lack of a better term, is one piece of advice that the head of TED gives to everybody, and that's to give, right? If you want to make the audience like you and listen to you, you need to give them something, right? That's what you're doing when you're giving a speech in particular. You're handing something over to them. You're not selling something, right? You're not trying to sell trucks in a country song. You are trying to give them something, whether that's advice, whether that's knowledge, whether that's life lessons or morals, right? Anything that you do in public speaking should be to give to the audience. If you're giving them something, they're more willing to listen. This is why people love Oprah, because she gives them cars all the time. Or did give them cars all the time, right? But again, that doesn't mean you should hand out candy every time you go speak. I mean, in the content of your speech, provide something that your audience can take with them. So, some tips here. Make sure the topic's interesting, right? Or make it interesting. Maybe it is a boring topic to some people, but if you can make it interesting, that's important, right? That's the hardest thing I have as an English teacher. I have to make this subject interesting to people that hate it, right? Make sure that you prepare your speech. So as you're delivering speeches for YouTube, this is really important because you're recording, and so I shouldn't see really any flaws in the speeches because you have time to prepare, right? Make sure that, especially in your Mosaic speeches this week, that you're using interesting examples and illustrations. So don't just say, like, oh, I love shoes, here's my favorite pair of shoes. But, what makes it interesting, right? What makes that pair of shoes interesting? Where have those shoes been? What have those shoes seen, right? If I were to show my pair of boots right now, for instance, I'm very utilitarian about my shoes. I have one pair of boots that serves all my purposes other than, going to the gym or something. But these pair of boots are my casual boots. They're my walking boots. I wear them to work. I wear them to weddings and funerals, right? I wear them all the time. But I wouldn't just say, these are my boots. They go everywhere with me, right? I would maybe include a story that the boots that I have on right now, they're about 2 years old. They're falling apart, and I just have a lot of memories with them. And one of the reasons that they're falling apart, for instance, is that earlier this year I was fostering puppies, and as they got older, about 5 or 6 weeks, and they were teething, I was leaving my boots around the house, and they found my boots, and some of them were chewing on the zipper of those boots. And so I don't actually have the zipper to these boots anymore, right? To either one. And so I've actually kind of rigged some nails into the loopholes so I can actually get the zipper up and down. And I'm in the market for new boots, but I really appreciate these boots because of some of the memories that I've had in them, right? And so this is one memory that I don't really want to let go of. So if I'm in a Mosaic speech, right, if I were to hold these up, I wouldn't just say, I love these boots. I'd tell you the story about the boots, that I had these puppies that, I love very much. One of them's at my feet right now. And, one of his brothers is responsible for one of my boots breaking. And this one right here is responsible for the other one breaking. So just think about that. Use some interesting examples. Make sure in your Mosaic speeches you're organizing this in a manner that makes sense. So maybe it's most important to least important. Maybe it's least important to most important. Or maybe it's by like theme or type of object or illustration, whatever it is, right? So maybe your first two are pieces of art and your last three are physical objects or something like that, right? So make sure you're organizing them in a manner that makes sense. Make sure you're being vivid in your language, so you're not just speaking very plainly, but you're illustrating the point. And be energetic, right? Again, some of you from already sort of watching some of your introduction speeches, and this is something that we'll work on, so it's not a fault of anybody, but I know it can be very intimidating to stand in front of that camera, right? And just be like, hello, my name is Sean, and these are my boots, and I like these boots, right? That's part of glossophobia, right? You're nervous because you're worried about how you're going to be judged, and it's weird because no one's actually physically in front of you. The thing to kind of keep in mind is that even though it's a camera that you're looking at, there are people on the other end of that camera. And so you have to envision them, right? You have to maintain this type of energy. You have to kind of don't be so stilted in your speech. And this is something that you can practice, right? As you record it, watch yourself, and listen to what you're doing. If you sound like this and it kind of sounds robotic, go back, practice that again. If you sound like this and it sounds robotic, that sounds better than I said it before. So again, just practice the energy that you have in your speeches, but don't be like televangelist excited, right? That's not what we want. And then, so your Mosaic speeches, you're going to use visual aids, right? Make sure that whatever you use in these speeches is you can see it. And if it, the smaller it is, hold it closer to the camera. The bigger it is, make sure that your camera is set up accordingly. Try to remember that you, again, are delivering the speech to people. So try to involve them in some way. I know that might be difficult for a Mosaic speech, but it's going to be important when we get to like the demonstration speech, right? Because they need to understand whatever it is that you're demonstrating. And then just try to maintain mutual respect. Again, you all are in the same class, so that's kind of a mutual thing that you have in common. Make sure that you're being sincere. You're providing, again, you're giving them valuable information. So don't just pick 5 things in this Mosaic speech that are in the room around you. Pick 5 things that you really want people in the class to know about you. That if you were to go into a job interview, or if you were to go out into the world and meet somebody for the first time, what are 5 things that really describe who you are and things that you want people to know about you, right? So, and also those things should provide you with enthusiasm, right? Don't be like, this is my notebook. I use it to write a lot, right? Pick something that's useful, right? This is on this puppy thing, right? This is one of my first dogs ever. His name was Webster, like the dictionary, right? This is him as a puppy. I don't know how well you can see it. But he was, we got a dog when I was like 8 or 9 or something, and it was an Australian Shepherd. It was too big, and it actually ended up dragging me across the yard because he got too big, and we just couldn't keep him where we were. We didn't have enough space. He really needed to run. And so I was really upset when we got rid of him. We gave him to a family of 8 that had a very large farm. So it's much better for the dog in that situation, right? But I was very upset because I've always wanted a dog, and I lost my dog. And then my parents surprised me when I was 10 or 11, with this puppy as a dachshund. He was my best buddy of all time. Followed me anywhere, always knew when I was coming home from school. Right at 3:30, he knew the bus was coming before it even showed up. He would be barking at my dad to open the door, right? That's what I mean by showing enthusiasm, showing the listener that you actually care about the thing that you're showing, right? And it can be anything. It can be something simple. These aren't things that I would necessarily use for my Mosaic speech, but this is my little Heisenberg pop figure. He protects me. That's what I tell people. He's at my desk to protect me. It's from Breaking Bad, for those of you that don't know. That's something that I really like, but I'm not overly enthusiastic about. I wouldn't be able to really tell people why that means something about me in some way. I really like Breaking Bad. I'm rewatching it right now with my girlfriend. I like the pop figure, right? But that's not enough to really get the audience hooked in. So there's a couple things to keep in mind. And that's pretty much it. So let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for listening to an otherwise boring topic. Hopefully I've made it interesting for you, as is my goal as a speaker. And shoot me any questions through Remind.